Awesome. Welcome back to a bit of curiosity. Today we're on a different location. We're out of the office. We're here on the mountain, enjoying time with my good friend Craig Lloyd. To kind of give a little intro, Craig is a 52-year-old husband and father of 4 boys. And as a talent strategy coach, he works with a consulting firm in Salt Lake City to help companies scale and grow through better talent management practices. Craig's also an outdoor adventurer who loves running ultra marathons, backcountry skiing, rock climbing, peak bagging, and mountain biking. And there's probably several other things that we could add to that list as well, right?
Probably could be.
His favorite adventure partners are his own kids, who seem to share many of the same passions. Craig strives to live as authentically as possible, and as a result has some interesting beliefs and opinions about life, which hopefully we'll get into. So Craig, it's a privilege, man. Thanks for joining me.
I'm happy to be
I'm excited to kind of get into this.
Yeah, me too.
So I think we'll cover a lot of this stuff in your bio that we kind of talk about here, right?
Okay.
But first, let's kind of talk a little bit about leadership as a leadership strategist and consultant. For those of us that are trying to hone our leadership skills or enhance those, what would you say are kind of some of those key elements that can help us improve as leaders?
It's a great question. The number one thing, and studies have shown this to be true, the number one competency for leaders to develop if they want to be great leaders is self-awareness. And it's as simple as understanding the difference between who I am, what are my strengths and weaknesses that I bring to my leadership role, and how does that impact other people. And so there's a great author, Tasha Eurich, who defines self-awareness as the combination of internal and external self-awareness. Most leaders come to the table with one or the other, but not both.
Okay.
And so a lot of my work is helping them develop both sides of that self-awareness so they understand how to work with individuals on their team better to create stronger teams, more productive employees, and more highly engaged individuals.
Okay, and that probably looks different for every individual, right? But
Absolutely.
But how, because as you pointed out, right, they may come to the table with one of the two, but rarely both.
True.
And so how do you unlock that second one? How do you help them enhance? Because self-awareness can be a really tricky thing for us to develop.
Yeah. In fact, I mean, according to Eurich and a 5-year study that she did, of 5,000 people, 95% of people think they're self-aware. 15% actually are, right? So
I don't know that I'm surprised with that statistic.
No. But when you drill down into it, it goes back to the reason that you're talking about. It's because most people don't know how to define it. And they get stuck in one or the other, unaware that there is another half to this that they need to develop.
Yeah.
And so as a consulting firm, we're a certified partner with the Predictive Index, and the first thing that we lean into all the time is using a behavioral assessment to understand a person's natural drives and needs. And then once you understand what those are, you start to do some self-awareness practices with these leaders and help them understand, are they leaning into the strength side, or are the people that they're leading seeing more of their caution areas and those behaviors that are detrimental to building better teams? And once you unlock that, then it's just about building practice after practice to help them develop those skills so that it becomes easier for them over time.
So who are some examples of leaders that you could kind of pinpoint and say, okay, this leader is self-aware in this way, but maybe not this way, and this and then maybe some leaders that are you feel like have a good balance that would be publicly well known.
I mean, let's just start with an obvious one. Elon Musk is a perfect example of a famously unaware leader. That guy is internally self-aware. He knows his strengths down to a T. He has no awareness to how those strengths impact other people. Moreover, he doesn't care.
Yeah.
And that's fundamentally a problem. He's a brilliant individual. His legacy of what he's contributed to society will be unmatched in our generation. But if you wanted to rate him on a level of effective leaders, got to be one of the worst.
Would you put Steve Jobs in that category as well, or?
I think if you went into most of the top CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, lots of them probably fall into that space.
Okay.
And I mean, there's been articles written on that. There's a positive side to that, is that they're so driven, they're so motivated, they're so internally focused on the way that they want to do things that it leads to great success, which is good for them. It's just not always great for their teams.
Yeah.
Right? They tend to have high rates of turnover throughout all levels of the organization. Those behaviors tend to be pervasive from from senior leadership, executive leadership, all the way down to frontline leaders. It's a practice that just trickles down.
Yeah.
And so, when you start to look at some of those leaders who possess a high level of self-awareness, they may not be wildly well known, but their organizations are strong. There's a CEO of a Midwestern bank that I work with.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever heard of the bank. I'm not even going to share the name, but as a leader, he knows those strengths and weaknesses. And I'm talking the average employee tenure in his bank, 20 years. Like, people just love to work there, and they love working for him and the entire executive team because it's something that they have been practicing for decades.
So internally self-aware people are the ones that we tend to know about as far as like executive level leaders primarily, probably.
Yeah, because externally self-aware people who don't possess the internal self-awareness, they're always paying attention to how their behaviors might be impacting other people. And so they kind of live this life of chasing a behavior they don't understand or a behavior they don't recognize in themselves.
Okay.
And so they're always trying to be something they are not.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Because all they see is the impact. They're like, when I walk in a room, if I'm overly talkative or I'm too quiet or I'm too assertive, I see all I recognize is that other people are negatively responding to those behaviors. Then I'm constantly trying to adapt who I am without really leaning into the fact that sometimes that assertiveness is necessary.
So I'm probably more of an externally self-aware person. Like, I don't know. Like, that's interesting.
My history with you, we all do this. We flash back and forth between the two. I think you're fairly internally self-aware, but sometimes you focus too externally self-aware.
I think
and you
that's
beat yourself up for it.
I think that's a fair assessment.
You actually beat yourself up for it, which you shouldn't do.
Oh, thank you. So no, I think that's So how so in your own life, in your own practice, would you consider yourself balanced in these two areas?
Oh, I'm part of the 15%. I think the second you say that, you're out of it. Here's one of the things that I've learned throughout all of my time trying to explore this space is that none of us, true self-awareness is not a finish line. It's a practice.
Yeah, sure.
And we ebb and flow in and out of it. And I wouldn't say for me that it is something that I move in and out of based on certain events in my life, and as a response I'm self-aware for a year or two, and then maybe I struggle for 6 months and then I bring it back. No, I would say it turns off and on from day to day.
Yeah,
and
that's
sometimes
fair.
from meeting to meeting. In fact, I was doing a 4-hour long kind of training session with an executive team at a local car dealership. And somehow I completely lost the external self-awareness that they were fully checked out after 2 hours. They were done, over it. And I just hunkered down into my own natural leadership style and facilitation style. And I just pushed through to the end. And their response was nothing short of, yeah, let's not ever do that again.
Yeah. So you lost them because you were too internally self-aware.
I was just too locked into my own behaviors.
Yeah.
And I wasn't paying attention to the room. And I think that's, we naturally lose sight of that. Sometimes we get lost in the room and we just start adapting, and then everything you're trying to accomplish goes out the window.
Sure. So I'm a self-prescribed Simon Sinek fanboy.
That's great. Love Simon Sinek.
Simon wrote a book, Leaders Eat Last, right?
Yep.
Have you read it?
No.
Okay. Well,
But
then
I probably will now.
Then I can't pick it apart too much. But I think like the concept, right? Like leaders eat last is really like, okay, we're putting our team first. He leads into the book really talking about the Marines specifically, and he had a lot of experience with the Marines. He was overseas with them and kind of watched how they treated, and a lot of times the corporal, the admiral, the leader was the last one to come in to eat, right? Like he was the one making sure that everybody was taken care of, right? Like it's all about it's really about like team before country. And he talks a lot about that in that book. And but it's really this mentality of like, okay, I'm putting team first. Is that strictly an external, like is that an external self-awareness, or is that kind of a balance of both?
I'm not sure if that's even a self-awareness practice as much as it is a taught leadership practice that his experience with the military expected.
But like and you'll have to read the book, and not having read the book, we can't pull examples specifically, and I'm not fresh enough on some of the examples, but he pulls business leaders, right? And shares some experiences with like when in downturns, when the company is maybe struggling, like these leaders will give up salary or bonuses and so that they can keep their team, their people employed. And so he loves kind of highlighting some of these businesses where they never laid off people because they didn't care about the share price or any of that stuff. It was really all about like this is community, this is family, right? Like our employees are family. We're going to do everything that we can, and to the extent of some people were pooling, some people were like, hey, I'll take a break on my 401k, or I'll take a pay cut for a period of time as long as I still have a job, right? But a lot of it came top down, and really that was the approach of, okay, leaders eat last. Like I've got a client that's a climbing gym, and they've had some lean years, they've struggled, and finally the owner said, you know what? I'm going to forego my entire salary because I want to make sure that this thing stays afloat. I want to make sure my people are paid, and I'll step aside and give the consulting where I need, but it's about the people. Is that?
This is just me, and I could be wrong. I would say that's less about self-awareness, and it's more about other leadership competencies that are required to be a great leader.
Okay.
I would also say I have such a respect for leaders who do that. And at the same time, I go, well, of course you're going to do that because you can. Of course you're going to do it because you can go a year without a salary and your personal life is not impacted.
Right.
And so it's cool and it's a wonderful gesture and I applaud them and I think it's amazing.
But if you look at the street, though, it's completely opposite. Like we've incorporated too much Welchian economics to where it's like, oh, we're going to have a bad quarter. And
I'm going to line my pockets
it's
first.
Short-time views, right? Like we're going to have a bad quarter, so I'm going to let go of 30% of our staff so that I still get my bonus, so that we hit our profit margin, right?
Yeah.
It happens all the time, right?
Yeah.
Like you look at majority of publicly traded companies, and that's how it.
Yeah.
That's like as soon as you see layoffs, it's like, okay, well, why are the layoffs, right? Like why are the layoffs?
Yeah, when you're recording record profits.
Yeah.
And so again, I think it's a multitude of competencies and behaviors that go into strong leadership. That's why I applaud them. I don't want to take anything away from them by saying it's nice that you can do that because you can. But the truth, their style of leadership is that leaders eat last, servant leadership, right? I'm going to do everything I can for my team because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I think those people are just, on top of being good leaders, they're genuinely good humans. And we need more of that. We need a lot more good humans around, whether they're in leadership or not. So,
okay, so you take these principles, you go out and you coach, you consult with teams and leaders, executive teams, and help them develop these. So how have you used that to translate to your own life?
Oh, wow. Well,
I'm putting you on the spot here.
No,
so.
this is great. I mean, this is a part of it I like. Everything that we do in leadership translates to home. So again, leaning into this idea of like understanding behavior through what naturally drives people. I've had my wife and two of my kids take this same behavioral assessment. And what you find is that there are some surprising insights that you can leverage to adapt your parenting style so that you connect with your spouse and your kids better.
Interesting.
And so here's an example I mean by that. This is not a surprise to you or probably anybody who's going to watch this, but I am a highly extroverted person.
Yep.
I am a big picture thinker. I don't get caught up in the details of things, which the backside to that is sometimes I struggle to follow through. And that I get energy from connecting with people.
Yeah.
Yet I have a 15-year-old who is literally the exact opposite of me. A good, in fact, I asked him right at the end of summer break, like, what was your favorite part of summer break? We had done some fun stuff as families, a couple vacations, we went camping. His response was, all of the days that I didn't have to do anything. Like, literally, I didn't have to leave the house. I didn't have to do this. And he has pushed back on us as parents on some things. It was difficult to get him to go and take his test so he could have his driver's permit. It's been just been like I've having to push him out the door to go practice driving.
Yeah.
And at first, before I had him take the assessment and really lean into the data, I was just going off of my own parenting style, lack of self-awareness, and going, but I would do it. Why can't you?
Yeah.
Your older brothers did it. Why can't you?
Yeah.
But his two older brothers are a lot more like myself and my wife than him. So what I learned from him is this is a child. I say child. He's 6'3" and like massive human, but who is he is driven by having consistency and stability and familiarity, and he needs information and details. So when he pushes back on me, I learned this, and this is a business practice that I brought home, where he's saying, I don't want to go get my permit because I don't know what to expect. And as parents, I don't get caught up in the details, so my natural response is don't worry about it. It'll be simple. Like, This is easy. You're going to pass. It's not going to be a big deal. You've done the studying. It's easy. That's not good enough for him. So how I corrected that from a parenting perspective is when he asked that question again, I looked at him and I said, Max, here's the deal. Here's exactly what's going to happen. We're going to drive down the DMV. It's going to take us about 30 minutes. We're going to walk in the door. There's going to be a kiosk. The guy's going to point us to a line. We're going to go step in that line where we're going to go to another kiosk and a guy's going to take your picture. You're allowed to smile. From there, he's going to give us a little ticket with a number on it. And we're going to wait in the back of the room, even though there's chairs everywhere. We're not going to sit in those chairs because it's the DMV. It's icky. We're not going to do that. We're just going to stand here. Eventually, they're going to call our number. Probably take about 5 minutes. We're going to walk up. You're going to do an eye test. He's going to ask you a few more questions, and then he's going to hand you a piece of paper where you're going to walk over to that side of the room, and you're going to sit down in front of a computer, and you're going to take the test. If you don't pass, you're going to take it again. You'll pass it at least the second time. You're going to walk up to the front. They're going to give you your permit. We're going to walk out. And he looked at me, and he went, okay. And all of that pushback for a month was gone because I simply took the time to meet him on his level and give him what he needed in that moment.
That's super fascinating because I don't think your son's an anomaly by any means,
No.
right? Like I think we see that a lot more in our youth today, right? That they're reserved because they have this concern or fear of the unknown, right? Like, and I think like I love that you spelled it, like you went through every single step, like in great detail right there. Like you just laid it out to all of us, right? Like,
and it went exactly as I told him it
Yeah.
would. Now, luckily I had that experience because I had done it a year and a half before with another kid. But sometimes we don't have that experience and we have to do a little bit of research.
Yeah.
And I think when we identify that in our children, that when they're pushing back on us, they're not necessarily saying no. What they're saying is, tell me more.
Yeah.
Put me at ease, right?
Yeah.
Satisfy that need I have for details and clarified expectations, which sounds a lot like leadership.
I really like that a lot too, because like my oldest is kind of similar. She's very reserved. She's very like just fear of the unknown, concern. I don't even know if I'd call it a fear necessarily as much as a concern of the unknown, right? Like a lack of understanding creates this concern. I'm not sure what's going to take place, right? Like, So do I really want to put myself out there? Because then there is like, maybe there's a fear of failure to some extent, right? But, I think that's a fascinating way to look at it. So,
you said something interesting there, and we see this in employees a lot too. Sometimes employees will come to us and they'll ask us a million questions, and we think they're being difficult. And what they want is information so that they don't do it wrong. Because there is a natural fear of failure with people who are like that. People like you and I, right, where we don't get caught up in those details.
But
yeah, but for you, failure,
but it's different.
For
right?
you,
like
a mistake and failure isn't like it's not like crushing. It's like, okay, well, I guess I won't do that again. Let's wind it back up. Let's go. And it's just easier for us.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of application of good leadership and translates into the home.
So in taking the assessment, what were a couple of the things that like stood out through the assessment, like as you saw that, okay, like this is why we need to kind of tweak this and approach it this way? With Max.
With Max?
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden it opened my eyes to my parenting style, my natural parenting style, which is very similar to my natural leadership style. It doesn't work with him.
Yeah.
And so by understanding what drives and motivates him, I can adapt my parenting style to meet him on a level that resonates. And that allows us to build stronger connections with people. It increases trust. It helps them feel valued. And so we have a stronger relationship as a result of that. Because people like that. People like my son. They take time to trust. They take time to build relationships. And just because we raised them for 15 years isn't a guarantee that that trust and strength in relationship is there. We still have to earn it. And the way that we earn it is by validating them.
I think as parents too, right? Like, and really leaders in any capacity, right? Like we always have to earn trust, because I think trust can be broken very quickly. Whether it's in a relationship or with your children or with employees, employers, right? Like, I think that trust, it can get to a level where it takes a lot to break it potentially, right? But especially early on, like you may have a little bit of trust, but that trust could erode or be eradicated very quickly.
Yeah, especially with employees.
Yeah.
Because it's not built on that same level of love and compassion that comes with a familial relationship.
Yeah.
So as an employee, we might work really hard to build trust, and then we just over one day or over the course of a week or something, maybe we get caught up in some of our own work. And I have examples of this as having been in leadership for 25 years, where I get self-involved. Not selfish, just self-involved in my own projects. And then I stop paying attention and being externally self-aware to the needs of my employees. And that trust erodes really fast.
Yeah.
And so there's just, it's a constant practice to maintain.
So what are some things what are some best practices, or what are some like action items that people could do to say, okay, like obviously it's going to vary depending on which type of self-awareness you tend to be more dominant in, but like what are some practices that people could incorporate into their lives so that they can better lead in their families, in their communities, in their jobs, whatever that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think everybody will do it different based on their own needs and their own natural leadership style. For me, because I'm a kind of hands-off, big picture leader, and I don't get caught up in the details, I have to be really precise and deliberate about moments like what you're talking about. So every Friday at 4 p.m., I have an hour booked on my calendar that is for reflection and planning. And I spend about 30 of those minutes doing self-assessment. What were some of the things I did well this week? Where did I lose that self-awareness in moments with clients, with my team members? How am I going to improve on that next week? And then planning in and booking time to plan and prepare for those interactions so that I'm not going into them just winging it and hoping for the best, right? That huck and pray mentality. And then the other thing I think that is really a good thing to practice is diving and doing some self-assessment and understanding, what are my triggers? What are the things that trigger me so that I become less self-aware in a moment?
Yeah.
And when we understand what those triggers are, Viktor Frankl, who authored Man's Search for Meaning, has this wonderful quote, and he says, between stimulus and response, there is space. In that space, we have the freedom to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And when he's talking about space, he means time. So
Yeah.
between stimulus and response, we have time to make a choice. Are we going to just react to that stimulus and go back to our own default behaviors? Or are we going to take a moment, self-assess, and say, how do I actually need to respond in this situation to maintain trust, to build stronger relationships?
Well, and I think if we've become a very reactionary person, that space becomes a lot smaller over time, right? Like, because we're just so quick to react.
Yes.
And so we have to then create that self-awareness of like, okay, I need to stop reacting and then catch ourselves, right? Like, and that's a practice in and of itself to then extend, because that space can then be extended as we practice it, right?
Yeah.
But I think if we've given ourselves to a lot of just react, right? Like okay, my kid does something and like my hand's up and I'm yelling at it, right? Like,
Yeah.
and if I do that too often, it becomes natural to me. Well, now I really got to practice to step back and create more space, because it only becomes quicker. It only becomes close. Like that time becomes
it just gets
less,
shorter,
right? Like it
yeah.
becomes
It's just
shorter.
we have a shorter amount of time to respond because the behaviors are more ingrained,
Yeah.
whether they're innate, right, as part of what that assessment measures, or even learned. Learned behaviors over enough repetition, the amount of time shortens. I mean, you talked about the military. Military is really good about drilling in habit-forming behaviors.
Yeah.
And I've worked with a lot of ex-military in leadership, and they will be the first to admit, they'll say things like, I'm trying to break down 25 years of habitual behaviors that I learned and were reinforced in the military. And they're not bad. This is not a knock on the military, because they were the right behaviors to have for the military.
Yeah.
They're not the right behaviors to have as an executive working in a hospital.
Right.
Or a car dealership, or some of these other other professional businesses.
Yeah.
And so they have to break those down, because they're now detracting from their ability to be effective. And so that's part of what we work on, is like, okay, how do we break some of these down, because it's not working for you.
Yeah, I was in a conversation with a friend of mine, and he's like, "Yeah, I have two emotions. I'm angry or hungry." and
oftentimes they're tied together.
And he's right, but he's a military guy, right? And that's really telling, because he spent 20, 30 years in the military.
Yeah.
And so you have to be trained to be fairly reactionary, not to the point of anger per se, right? But you've got to react and respond very quickly. But then when you're there with your kids and your family, you've got to react and respond a lot slower.
Yeah. And after 30 years of practice, we don't just turn that off.
No.
It's not a switch that you're like, oh, I'm not going to do this anymore.
Or when you come home after your weekend away at like with the National Guard or whatever, right? Like it doesn't just switch off. But
the same thing applies to leadership. I mean, you have these professional leaders who have spent decades building a company, furthering their career. And they've sacrificed time with their family. They've missed the baseball games. They've missed the gymnastics. They've missed piano recitals so that they can further their career. And what they also don't realize isn't just that they're missing things, but in an effort to be successful and become a successful leader, they're also building habits and practices that translate to the home. And so I tend to find that good parenting translates to good leadership, and vice versa. And I guess it just goes back to that same concept of like, if we can all just be better humans, then we'll be better leaders.
Yeah.
And it begins there.
Yeah. So I think that's a great segue into kind of community, right? Like how does enhancing these leadership skills help us improve within our community?
I just think when we're more mindful of ourselves and the impact that we have on other people, we naturally then take a little bit more time to consider those around us. We see a neighbor whose yard maybe isn't as nice as the rest, and instead of judging them, maybe we become inquisitive and we start to ask what's going on, and we find out that maybe they're dealing with some hardships. And so instead of being judgmental, we learn about their situation and we pitch a hand, and where we gather other people around us. And I think that it's that same thing applies. Like when you take more time to understand your own place in a community, then you begin to see where other people fit into it, even if they're wildly different from you.
Especially.
And you value those differences
Yeah.
for what they are, because I don't know about you, but I don't want to live in a community but where everybody thinks and acts and behaves exactly the same way. I want that diversity of thought and opinions. You know, I don't, whether that's religious or political or sociological or cultural, it doesn't matter to me. I welcome all of it.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, right? Like, and that's a powerful thing for all of us to develop better awareness of, right? Like, is how much diversity really benefits us, right? Like, George W. Bush said as president, right? Like, one of the great things of America is our faith and our diversity, and it like being like, I think we are the most religious diverse like nation on the earth.
Yeah.
And that's a powerful thing. Like, we talk a lot about the U.S. being a melting pot, whatever, right? Like, but we need to take that melting pot concept and translate that into, okay, now let's see each other where we are, right? And see each other, right? Literally, instead of just, oh, they're other, right? Like, you bring up the neighbor, right? Like, how judgmental we get, right? Like, and that judgment is based on a few things, but it's primarily based on fear.
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, my neighbor is like, why is their yard gone to crap? Oh, maybe they got a pot garden in the basement, and they just don't, like, they're too focused on dealing drugs out of the house, and they can't take care of the yard, or like, we can come up with some crazy, wild, outlandish stories.
Yeah.
When in reality, you go knock on the door, and it's like, oh yeah, like, I've been in and out of the hospital. I haven't been around, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm emotionally not, an emotional wreck, right? My dad just died and I just can't get out of bed. I don't want to deal with anything, right? Like, it could be a number of things, but we're so focused on the fear of the unknown
Yeah.
that we don't approach it, right? Like,
Yeah. And then we start to create stories, like
absolutely,
you said.
yeah, like crazy narratives, right? Like, and those narratives are all based on fear, and it's one of the politicians' greatest tools right now, is creating false narratives based on fear.
Yeah.
And are we going to give in to those fears, or are we going to go knock on the door of the neighbor that just moved in and bring them a plate of cookies and say, hey, we're here if you need to borrow an egg?
Yeah.
Like,
it's the but versus and mentality. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It's people who say, I'm glad you live in our neighborhood, but I don't like the way that you take care of your yard.
yeah.
And and we pretend it's okay. Instead of saying, I'm glad that you're in our neighborhood and I can't wait to hear more about it. So we don't caveat, we don't put conditions around it. Anytime we put a but or an even though or we put conditions on things. And I'm like, we need to stop caring about people conditionally. And we need to just use the word and then it becomes unconditional. It becomes this idea of like, I don't care who you are. I don't care, your story is as important as mine, is as important as mine. And again, there's value in that. So what can I learn from that? What can we learn from each other? How can we be better neighbors? How can we help each other?
Well, I think that's so, like, it's so important to craft this improved narrative by knowing what's really going on, right?
Yeah.
Instead of the false narrative and or the media narrative or like the fear-based narrative, right? Like, and well, let's go break that down, right? Like, there's so many opportunities for us to build bridges and bridge these gaps, whether it's in like I think I've shared this story on my podcast before, but so we've taken our kids to all 50 states, as you know. What an adventure. It was so much fun. It was a blast. But one of the coolest experiences that we had was we were in Savannah, Georgia. We were there on a Saturday. Well, for the Jewish faith, Saturday is Shabbat, right?
Yeah.
It is their Sabbath, right? From Friday evening to Saturday evening is Shabbat. Well, I told him, like, I said, let's go find, like, there's a synagogue here. Let's go to synagogue.
Yeah.
Let's just go sit in We're going to be extremely reverent, respectful, and let's go learn. Let's just go enjoy it. And we went, and it's the oldest synagogue in the United States.
Wow.
In Savannah, Georgia, and they were having a celebration at the time. I think it was their 197th year as a synagogue, right? And it was the coolest thing. It was okay, this thing is about as old as the founding of the country, right? And my kids just soaked it up, and they came up to us afterwards, talked to us, and they invited us to come into their food hall with them, and eat lunch with them.
Yeah.
And so we're there eating a kosher meal with a bunch of Jews as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they're there welcoming us, inviting us. We're just conversing about life and everything, and my kids had this great experience of connecting with the wonderful hospitality of the Jewish people.
Yeah.
And it was phenomenal.
Yeah.
And it's moments like that. They've had several moments like that as we went about these journeys, right? But it's just so good to see people where they are.
Yeah.
And so my children are not going to grow up with anti-Semitic beliefs or views, because they've seen the people, they know the people.
Yeah.
I have a couple really good friends that are Jews. They're phenomenal. I reach out to them every time I see some calamity or something, and I just reach out and care, right? Care and concern. And I've whether they're Muslim, Jewish, Sikh, Buddhist, let's get to know our neighbors. Let's get to know our people. Let's embrace the diversity.
Every community I've ever walked into where I've shown genuine curiosity for their own culture, I've been welcomed with open arms. And I've been to some interesting places. I've spent some time in Bolivia, and truer there than I've ever seen. I've been into the Pyrenees of Spain, small communities there, and some of the most welcoming, adoring people, because I cared enough to ask questions, to try and understand, to see their perspectives, to see the world through their own eyes, for no other reason than I just want to have this experience the same way you and your family did in Savannah, Georgia. And the response you get, that, again, my experience, 100% of the time is they will welcome you in. Always. And you will leave with a totally different perspective on life.
Yeah, I think we have a very jaded past as white people, white men specifically, right? And deservedly so, because there's been a lot of things that have been done, colonization, right? But if you look back at this and let's learn from our mistakes, right? Let's learn from the past. And it's okay, what was done wrong? Well, we can't go in and take over a place and force people to believe a certain way, right? Because we consider them heathen, because they're different than us, and then force feed them, okay, can we go in, can we help improve their lives? Are there things that we can do, provide clean water, provide better food? Are there things that we have the means to do to help improve their livelihood? Yeah. But are we going to force feed our beliefs? Are we going to force feed who we are to make them lockstep become just like us? And that's where colonization is really has done horrible things across the globe, right? And or apartheid or any of these things, right? There's a lot of jaded things, slavery here in the United States, right? It's forcing, it's using control and fear and dehumanization that creates problems and doesn't build communities, it destroys them. Whereas we can flip the script and we can start creating safe places of conversation, places of inquisition, places of curiosity, right?
Yeah.
To really start to know people.
Yeah.
And break down a lot of those barriers, not to necessarily convert them or to indoctrinate them or to go dogmatism, but to just know them and befriend them.
No community, no country, no culture no company has ever been hurt by opening their minds to a diversity of thought and culture and practice. Like, nobody's ever been hurt by that. Things have only been advanced.
Absolutely.
There's you cannot find an example. Now, when one side of those, when one side or the other begins to push it beyond a healthy practice,
to start to exert
of respect,
control.
That's where things break down. But as long as all parties involved maintain that level of curiosity and trust and contribution, you do the research. You'll never find a single organization that has been hurt by that. And that can be an entire country.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it just doesn't happen. And so I think companies and communities need to be very cautious about the way we talk and behave and interact with people who are different from us.
Absolutely.
And I'm not even saying different color and different religion. I'm just saying people who are different, who just think different.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They could be, we're white guys, so it could just be another white guy, but he might think different from me. Or the fact that that person is a woman, just that alone, they think different than me, and I need to value it instead of seeing it as an obstacle.
Well, and I think, like, going back to self-awareness, right? Like, I think internally self-aware people tend to not let a lot of people at the table, right? That it's like, okay, this is the way I've been doing it. This is the way I've done it. This is what works. This is what we're doing, regardless, right? Whereas those that are a little more balanced will take into consideration the alternate opinions, right? And I think, and that's where, like, things become really healthy and beneficial, is when alternate opinions can come.
Yeah.
And then we can really advance technology, community, problem solving. Like, we can really overcome a lot of these other challenges by taking in diverse thought. Yeah. And so even aside from faith or race or any of these other differentiators that are visible maybe on the outside, gender, whatever, right? Like, there's a lot of differences on the inside. But if we don't feel like we have a safe space to express our opinion or express our concerns with an approach, then we're going to lose that ability to advance. We're going to lose that ability to progress in certain ways.
Well, I mean, if you pay attention to some of the things that's happening in the United States right now, you start to see, like, wow, why all of a sudden do we feel like we're going backwards as a society? And we see it in certain pockets inside of the United States, and it's because we're closing ourselves off to the things that really help build America into the country we hope that it is.
Robert Putnam, I've brought up his books before, but American Grace or Bowling Alone talks a lot about this, right? Bowling Alone, just the title, right? Like, it's like, okay, I'm going to go, like, it used to be like you'd go down with your bowling team and you'd, like, you guys were from diverse backgrounds or whatever, but you're living in the Bronx and you go and you play bowling and you get to know each other and you're playing against teams that are very different, right? And it creates this sense of community. But now we're in a nation where more and more people are bowling alone. They're out there with their bowling. It's not as a team. It's not against people. It's just I'm by myself, right? And unfortunately, the statistics are showing that. And that book was written 15, 20 plus years ago, I think, and we continue to see that trend, right? Like you point out that there are areas where we are definitely going backwards because we are closing ourselves off and we're living in echo chambers and we're isolating ourselves from community, from different diversity, right? Like, so let's dive into the ultra running side of things.
Okay.
How has ultra running helped you kind of approach diversity or experience diversity?
I'll cite a couple of examples. The first of which I value highly, is that the farther a person runs, the less of a difference there is in abilities between genders.
Oh, for sure.
So I have a number of friends, female friends, that I run with, and they're all faster than me. And they've been faster than me for years. And that's not because I'm slow. They're faster than me.
Yeah.
So when I
My
look
wife's both faster than me because I'm slow, but also because she's very fast.
she's just fast. And I have an equal number of guy friends who are faster than me as well. But so you break down that gender barrier in ultra running. And when I first got into running, in fact, I struggled with it so hard, especially on the road scene, because you'd be like, I was super, like, I took 10th overall and I beat all the women. And I'm like, why is that a thing, right? Or this, you're in a 10K and you're like, I can't let that chick pass me, all right? I got chicked. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Just another person passed you. They're faster than you. They worked harder than you. They put in more training or whatever. And
that's such a roadie term too. I got chicked. Right?
I got chicked. Like that crap doesn't even cross my mind in ultras.
No.
Because you're just out there and look, you're 60, 70 miles in. We're all suffering. It's just who's suffering less in that moment is running faster. Yeah. And so I love seeing some of these events where you have like Courtney DeWalter, who's the outright winner. And we're seeing it more and more.
Yeah.
Or you see the top 10 total finishers, instead of it being all men, now it's like 70-30, 60-40, sometimes even 50-50. And so I'm really grateful for that. The other thing are having events. I'm involved with the Trans Rockies Run, which is a 6-day stage race out in Colorado. And I run the media team out there. And one of the things that I value most about that event is the inclusivity, that they actively reach out to diverse running groups and say, come here and have this experience. Harlem running group and some of these other kind of East Coast based inner city groups where they're now bringing really strong runners from, communities of color, and they're coming out in small groups and they're having this experience because many of them haven't ever been outside the city. Right. They've never run in the mountains, and now you're putting them at 12,000 feet on day 2.
Here's some oxygen.
And I look back now and I think some of the people I've met through that, like I stay in touch with them, and that was 3-4 years ago.
And REI's done a lot of stuff along those lines too, in getting people. Even our national park system has done a lot. Like, let's get every child into a park. Let's get them out of the city, right? And let's go after maybe the underprivileged communities so that we can create more diversity in the outdoors, because historically the outdoors has been a very white dominated activity, affluent white dominated activity. And so now bringing it to these communities and bringing these communities out to these experiences gives them a sense of connectedness and that they don't necessarily have on the streets, right? Or in some of these more urban areas.
Well, and you see that running's for everybody.
Absolutely.
It's not a weighted average of who can be a good runner or not a good runner. Yeah. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter where you're from.
Right.
It just depends on the amount of work that you want to put in.
Yep.
And anybody can do it if they're willing to show up and commit themselves to the training and everything else. And there's nothing more rewarding than being out on a course with a world full of people instead of just this singular kind of thing, which is weird to say because we live in Utah, and we lack some of that diversity. So which is why I actually like to travel and race and things like that, because you see it a lot more.
Yeah, it's growing in diversity, for sure. Absolutely. But it's still not we're not Toronto, we're not New York City.
No, right? But we're getting better.
So. But no, that's so. Yeah, so let's what would you say is your greatest failure? Kind of dive into the Craig Lloyd here.
Oh my goodness, my greatest failure. In life, or what are we talking about?
In life, in professional pursuit, you don't have to give me your greatest, but
No, honestly, I think this is something that happens to a lot of people. This is just me. but I actually think this happens to a lot of people. We come into this idea of self-awareness, especially as it applies to us professionally, way too late. And we come into it as a result of experiences that make some of those caution areas that have held us back, they become aware to us after a repetitive number of experiences.
Yeah.
So I felt like one of my failures in my professional career was I was never going to reach a senior leadership level. And I just felt like I never knew why. But then after a long enough time, I kept hearing people, the other, bosses, say, you're not ready for this role and you're not ready for this role. And it was always the same reason why I wasn't ready. And it had to do with follow through and attention to detail, right?
Yeah.
All of the things that I learned from a behavioral assessment.
The external self-awareness things that you weren't great at. Yeah.
Which if I had taken it 20 years earlier in my career, I could have bypassed all of that and worked on it a lot sooner. And if I were to be honest, I've probably only put I'm 52 now. I've probably only been heavily working on that for 5 to 6 years.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think my biggest failure was just not having that insight when I was 22, 23 years old to go, okay, if you don't work on it now, this is going to hold you back later in your career. So start to build those adaptive practices right now so that they become comfortable. They feel more natural later on when there's a higher demand for it. And I feel like that, is that it's not even something I had control over, but it still feels like a failure. Because I look back now and think, well, what a simple thing to correct.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I would say professionally, that's probably the biggest thing.
So do you think that you would have been receptive at 23, 22 years old if that was taught to you at that point?
Oh, I don't know. I would like to think so, because I think if there's one thing that hasn't changed about me, even since I was a teenager or my 20s, is that I've always been open to feedback, and I've always strived to improve myself as a leader, because I was leading, different teams of one sort or another by the time I was 24, and I was always open to how do I get better at this?
Yeah.
How do I improve? And I think I would have been. I think if I had seen it, if I had seen the data, right, instead of just somebody telling me.
Yeah.
If I had seen the data, it would have become less of. See, that's where I was then more internally self-aware, because I had other people telling me, but I didn't want to hear it.
Yeah.
Right? Because it just made me feel bad. If I had seen the data, I would have just gone, oh, this isn't personal. It's just a thing. It's just who I am.
Yeah.
And because it's who I am, it's now just information that I can respond to and start to build better practices about.
So what are you doing to get this practice into college curriculum? That's got to be the natural next question, right?
Well, I mean, one of the problems we have with any educational system is we don't focus on what the real output should be. We focus on memorization.
Oh yeah.
Right?
No, it's
and rote response of what we're learning. We don't actually care that the single most important thing in any college curriculum is that we need to teach people how to learn.
Yeah.
And that trumps everything.
Which is why the humanities are so awesome still, right?
Yeah,
because it becomes less of that and more of the here's how you learn, here's think for yourself type of, as a philosophy major myself, right? I loved philosophy because that's exactly what it did, right? It wasn't rote memorization, it wasn't facts and figures, and when I went back to school, it was okay, do I go to do a business degree and coast through it because I've got plenty of years in business and marketing, right? Or do I go do something that I'm going to have to think and isn't going to be outdated the day I walk out of school?
Yeah. I think the most valuable thing any college can teach a first-year student is just how to learn.
Yeah.
How to be curious, how to learn, how to be open to feedback.
So So what would you consider as your greatest accomplishment?
Marrying my wife.
That's a great answer. That's a great answer.
I mean, if there's anybody who's behaviorally taught me more self-awareness, it's nobody's taught me more than her.
I think that's the case for most married people if we really want to stay married. And,
yeah, but here's the thing: is I think if I'm being honest, having been married twice, and my first wife was great too. But I do think what happens, I think where that self-awareness comes from in a lot of marriages is a response to negative interactions.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I would say with my wife, it hasn't. That self-awareness hasn't come as a response to mistakes. It's actually come as a response of her truly teaching me in those moments in a very healthy way, in a very positive way of like, here's what you're doing. Here's what the behaviors are that you're doing, and making it a conversation. So here's a great example of what I'm talking about. One of my favorite professional stories actually involves my wife. 10 years ago or so, I was a senior manager in a software company running a learning and development team, a training team. And it had been in my sights. It was my goal that I wanted to be a director because I was managing my own budget. I had a team of 16 people. They were geographically dispersed. And I'm like, this is my time to move from functional management to strategic leadership. And over the course of that process, they made some organizational changes, and I had a new boss who I had known for several years in the company. And she sat me down and said, I know it's your desire to be a director. And I'm telling you right now, it's not going to happen. And here's why. All the things that we've talked about. So I went home very upset, angry, and I started talking to my wife. And she said, why do you want to be a director? What is it that's so important to you? And I start rattling off all this stuff. You know, I've worked hard and the company owes me, all the stereotypical stuff.
I'm entitled to this position.
And she finally says, no, I don't want to hear, not from a company perspective, in life. Why is it so important for you to be a director, to have that title, to be at that level? And when I really thought about it, I didn't have an answer for her. That wasn't selfish in nature. And what I finally said was, I feel like at that level, I can have a larger impact on the company as a whole. And she said, well, how are you able to achieve that even if you're not a director? And I just went, what's really motivating me here? What am I really trying to accomplish? And as a result of that, I started to pursue this idea of like, how do I really want to contribute instead of how do I want to get back? And it wasn't long after that before I moved into human resources, started to manage all of the organizational development programs for the company, did some HR business partner work because it's just part of the gig. And that change alone shifted my entire career to where I am today. And it was that moment, standing in a closet, talking to my wife, that moment of self-awareness of like, I've been looking at this all wrong.
So good.
And so for me, that's probably my greatest accomplishment.
Okay. The sun's going down. It's getting cold here.
It is getting
so let's run through a couple of rapid fire questions really quick. So what book are you reading right now?
I'm reading two books. I read a professional book and a personal book. So I'm reading, love that we've got a helicopter right behind us, by the way. Which you probably can't hear on the microphone. I'm reading...
Do we need to pull out your Goodreads?
No. It's Crucial Conversations. I'm reading Crucial Conversations, which has been around for a while. It's okay. That's my current rating for it. It's okay.
All right.
And then on a personal level, I always read like a good distracting book. So I'm reading the Red Rising series. I'm on book 4. Okay. Which is fantastic.
What's a book you've read in the last 12 to 18 months that you'd highly recommend to others?
Think Again by Adam Grant.
Oh, yeah.
You've read that, have you?
I haven't read it. I've got it sitting on my shelf right now. So
it is
because that's his new one, right? No,
Well,
that's
actually,
his,
yeah,
no, that's his older one.
It's his older one.
I've read
Yeah.
Think Again. Yeah, it's his new one that I've got sitting.
Yeah,
that
I want to
read
read his new one too.
Yeah.
So
No,
either
Think
that
Again's
or
great.
either read that or Insight by Tasha Eurich, which is all about self-awareness.
Okay.
Absolutely amazing books.
Yeah, I will throw all of those in the show notes, but yeah, I want to check out the Tasha one for sure.
Cool.
You've mentioned it already like 4 times. So.
Yeah, I think she's amazing. She's a research professor. So it's all data-based, just like Adam Grant. It's all driven by studies and research and data. And like I just eat that stuff up. So
Okay. If you didn't live in Utah and you could live anywhere, where would you live?
Italy,
Okay. A specific part?
Dolomites.
Okay.
That's easy.
So, like-
I could do that, no problem.
What? Yeah. Okay.
When my kids are gone, when my youngest is almost 13, and when he's out of the house, my wife and I will undoubtedly move and most likely go to Europe.
The Dolomiti is amazing. Like
Yeah.
it's phenomenal.
Never been.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
And I would still live
dude,
there.
you'll love it. You'll love it. Okay, so you live in a place you haven't been to yet, but where have you traveled? Where's the best place you've traveled?
Either the Pyrenees in Spain
Okay.
or Bolivia.
Okay.
Love Bolivia.
Both of those you called out
Cochabamba.
earlier, so.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I called them out for a reason because they're
Yeah.
just. I'm not sure I would live in Bolivia, visit as often as I could, but I would live in the Pyrenees in Spain for sure.
So I
as
know
well.
you know Ben Light. He's been on this podcast, but he brought up the Pyrenees. That was his location.
Yeah, Pyrenees are amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and probably for a different reason. He loves them from an adventure standpoint.
Yeah.
I love them from a people standpoint. Like the culture there, the people there are just unmatched.
It's awesome. So, what else are you working on? Anything fun, exciting outside of your professional consulting?
No, I'm at this phase right now where I've got 4 kids.
Loving being a dad right now.
3 of them are teenagers, and they're busy and they're fun and they're like I'm having so much fun being a dad. Like that's just the big focus.
Okay.
So,
If people want to connect with you, where can they do that?
LinkedIn, my LinkedIn profile is Craig Lloyd. Instagram, my Instagram's pretty much solely about running. So I'm currently sort of injured, so there's not a lot going on with my Instagram. But I would say those are probably the 2 main places
Okay.
to find me. I have a YouTube channel, Trail and Ultra Running is my YouTube channel, and so I post adventure stuff. Again, I got to get back on the adventure wagon, but
Injuries are rough, but
a little bit. So
you just have to post more mountain biking stuff now.
yeah, yeah.
It still
Nobody wants to watch me though.
the
Like
trail side
the
of
guy
things.
slowly riding down the trail, trying not to fall over, versus these guys hucking 60-foot road gaps.
Fair enough.
A little different.
Fair enough. Well, Craig, it was a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
That's great.
So, again, a bit of curiosity. Thank you, Craig Lloyd.
You bet. Thanks, man.